I am a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I really try to follow Him as well. And it's truly by His grace that I stand before you tonight to talk to you about His unconditional love and His powerful protection and His awesome deliverance. Now here at Celebrate Recovery, we require everyone to write out their testimonies, and then we read them. And there's several reasons that we do that, but one of the reasons is that it helps us to keep us in the allotted time. And some of these folks have already cut into my time, right? April the 6th, 1951, in Memphis, Tennessee, I was born Charlie Russell Tant. Later, I became an Ellison. I never knew who my real dad was. He could have been one of many different men that my biological mother had been with. However, through recent DNA, I have discovered that I'm a Clements. So I started out as a Tant, then an Ellison, then a Clements. Kind of mixed up. When I was just a few weeks old, an 8-year-old boy was walking down the street in Memphis, Tennessee, and he found me and my sister, who was 1 year older than I. He heard us crying in an empty house, and he ran home and told his mama. His mother was Evelyn Ellison, who was married to my biological mother's uncle. So they knew who lived in this house. They came and rescued me and my sister from the most horrible living conditions that you can imagine. All that was in my crib was an empty beer bottle. Betty Tant, my biological mother, just did not have time for her children. She was an alcoholic, and she was out making the bars. Not only was my mother an alcoholic, but her mother and daddy was as well. So when I was born, my DNA was deep-rooted with alcohol addiction, which you will later learn that I gave into. When you have alcohol or drugs in your DNA, it's very likely that you're going to give into that addiction. And it's very difficult to overcome it. Not impossible, but difficult. I was raised by Sidney and Evelyn Ellison, and my sister Beverly was raised by Robert and Frances Ellison. So we grew up thinking that we were cousins. I did not know that my cousin was my sister until I learned of my adoption at the age of 15. For the first few years of my life, the Ellisons were in and out of court trying to adopt us. Because when Betty would sober up, she would do what all good mothers would do. She would fight for her children, and she did. But when she gave into her addiction, she would lose the battle. Over a period of time, the Ellisons adopted us. The juvenile court inspector reported to the courts that when he went to the Tant home, it was the most horrible living conditions that he'd ever seen in his life. It's only by the grace of God that I lived through it. And also, if abortion had been legal in 1950, I doubt seriously if I would be here tonight. Evelyn and Sidney Ellison were good people. They were not church people, but good people. You don't have to be a church person to be a good person. I know some people that are better than church people. But there was one major problem. My new mother, Evelyn, was a drug addict. She was hooked on prescription drugs. The same doctor that gave Elvis his drugs was also providing my mother drugs as well. Drugs finally killed her at the age of 47 when she caught the house on fire. And I wish I had time to tell you about that, but I don't. It was a terrible way to die. Betty Tant, my biological mother, also died at a young age because of alcohol abuse. She was 57. I preached her funeral with only 6 people present. As I mentioned, I did not know that I was adopted for sure until I was at the age of 15. But as young as I can remember, I had the feeling that I just did not belong. I would hear people whisper, "Is that adopted boy?" Now, folks think that children can't hear whispers. They can. I can't now, but back then I could. You can hear them. You've got to be careful what you whisper around children. And it confused me tremendously. When I was about 7, my adopted brother, Bobby, who was 4 years older than I, told me that I did not belong in their home, I was not his brother, and that his mom and daddy was not my mom and daddy. And by the way, he was the same one who told me that Santa Claus was not real as well. But he and I became very close later, and I had to preach his funeral as well. So I can remember when I was about 5 years old that my parents, I could hear them fighting. And I heard my adopted mother say, "Charlie is the problem." From that point on, every time they would fight, I thought that I was the problem, the fault. You see, they had 4 children before they brought me into the home, 4 biological children. They brought me into the home, and she had her hands full. She was a drug addict. Don't misunderstand me. My adopted mother is my real mama. She's the one who raised me the best that she could when she was sober. And when she was sober, she was a good woman. A very good woman. Just wasn't sober a lot. I was sexually molested by 2 different people repeatedly for about 5 years, from about 5 years old to about 10. And only by the grace of God, I am what I am. By the way, about 9 years ago, as a result of teaching in another church about Celebrate Recovery, preparing for a lesson on forgiveness, God taught me how to forgive totally everyone who had hurt me. He set me free, and the hurt went away completely. Praise God. However, as a young boy, all of this played a very heavy toll on my early life. I grew up thinking that I was not loved and did not belong. Somewhere I got the idea that I was a nobody, and I really felt that way. So what do? I did what many of you have done. I turned to something that would ease the pain. About the age of 14, I turned to alcohol. And I mentioned earlier, it was already in my DNA. When I took my first drink, I was hooked. As a young teenager, I was arrested 3 different times. Twice for public drunkenness, once for robbing a store. At the age of 16, my family moved from Memphis, Tennessee to West Memphis, Arkansas. I found out later that it was because the judge had told my daddy that if he did not get me out of Memphis, he would lock me up and throw away the key. I had become a very troubled teenager who was constantly in and out of trouble. This was my adopted dad, who loved me so much, who I thought nobody loved me, moved from one state to the other to protect his troubled teenager. And I did not know that until after he had died. When I was about 18, God sent me a very special gift. I met Linda. She was the first decent girl that I ever knew. She was what I was looking for in a wife. You say at 18, I already knew what I was looking for in a wife. Now, I made a lot of bad decisions in my life, but I was not a bad person. I just made a lot of stupid decisions. Did a lot of bad stuff. Even as a young boy, I had made up my mind the kind of girl that I would marry, and it was not the kind of girls that I was dating. So, long story short, I could tell you a long story about how I met Linda, but it's an interesting. She was a good girl. She was a Christian girl. We met June the 1st. I asked her to marry me June the 22nd. And we were married August the 29th, just 3 months after we met. Only by the grace of God have we been married 46 years. She should have thrown me out many times. I have told many people that her first husband was a total jerk. And then I changed. The first 6 years of our marriage was a living hell for that girl. She did not drink, and I did. She even tried to drink with me, and she couldn't. God gave us 2 beautiful children. Renee was born in 1970, Chris in 1973. You would think that this would change me. I thought it would. I didn't change. My alcohol consumption only increased. I would go to work sober. I was a functioning alcoholic. I would go to work sober, but came home almost every evening drunk. During the first 6 years of our marriage, I was arrested 3 more times for DWI. Only by the grace of God I am here tonight. Only by the grace of God. Would you believe that I never had a serious accident, and I went from one place to the other never knowing how I got there? I had accidents, but not a serious accident. Never was charged with a felony. Is that interesting? Very interesting. I had good jobs, but I would use the paycheck that was needed for groceries, that was needed for the house payments, that was needed for the family to support my addiction. I do not know how Linda fed the children when I look back now. I don't know how she did it. I would tell myself that I did not have a problem. And the only one that I was hurting was me. And I could quit anytime I wanted to. See, that was the problem. I was in denial, and I did not want to change bad enough to change. Now listen to this. I was saved at the age of 16, but I continued to live a life that was filled with alcohol until I was 26. God would speak to my heart often about what I was doing. It was wrong. But I told you that the DNA of alcohol was deep-rooted. Deep-rooted. But God really got my attention one night in a bar in Jonesboro, Arkansas in 1973. A terrible tornado came through that town and literally destroyed the city. I was at a bar. Linda was at home with our young daughter, pregnant with our son. It took me hours and hours to reach home. I drove as far as I could. It was at night. Then I began to walk through fallen trees, torn up houses, electric lines all over the place. And I said, God, if you please make my family okay, I will quit drinking. I will never drink again. I went home, and my family was okay. House was kind of messed up, trees all over the place. I promise lasted about 1 week. Now, most people would not understand what I'm about to say. But 3 major God things occurred in my life when I was under the influence of alcohol. I met Linda. When I met Linda, I was half drunk. When I asked her to marry me, I was half drunk. And then thirdly, God called me to preach one evening when I was drunk. Don't tell me God don't love drunks and don't speak to them. It took another 3 years for me to totally surrender to God and permit Him to clean me up and change my life. In March 1976, I finally surrendered my life to God, and the road to recovery began. I quit drinking that day, March the 28th, 1976. God had done something that no one else could do, nor I. He gave me the desire and the power to begin the healing process. Now, I had rejected that desire and I had rejected that power many times. But that day I accepted it. And that power enabled me. That was a higher power. I quit smoking about a year later. The Bible says that I was pre-planned by God. And so was you, by the way. In Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you was born, I set you apart and appointed you as a prophet to the nations. I was not an accident, and nor are you. Now, my mom and whoever my daddy is did not plan me. But I was not an accident. God planned me, and He continued to open doors to permit me to become what He wanted me to be. He took a nobody and turned him into what I am today. Because the truth is, God never creates a nobody. Psalms 139:14 says, I will praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Ephesians 2:10 says, we are God's masterpiece. God makes somebodies. We make nobodies. But He wants us to realize that we're somebody for a life of purpose. When I surrendered to preach, I could hardly read, I could hardly write. I could not even speak very plainly. I had a very serious voice problem. I had failed the 6th grade, I'd failed the 7th grade, I'd failed the 8th grade, I'd failed the 8th grade the second time, and I quit. I was making straight L's. Again, I was a troubled child, not knowing where I belonged. Alcohol problem. Couldn't get past the sexual molestation that lasted for almost 5 years. But I want you to know what God did. And that's what a testimony is all about. It's about what God does. When I surrendered my life to God, I have now attended 3 seminaries. I've got Bible degrees. I made straight A's in every class I took in the seminaries. I even went and took a GED test just to see how I would do without any preparation, and made a very high score. God can take a nobody and make him into what He wants him to be. When my son Chris got hooked on drugs, it broke our heart. I told my wife, I said, I want you to go home and get our son and bring him home. We refused to give up on him. It broke our heart. We brought him home, and we loved him back to health. Robert helped us as well. I took him to daily NA meetings. God, listen to this. God used something terrible to speak to me about starting a Christ-centered 12-step program. I spent the next many months developing a 12-step program, and then one day, out of the blue, working on this project on the internet, I run across a man by the name of John Baker, who lived in California of all places, who had already started a 12-step Christ-centered program called Celebrate Recovery. And Celebrate Recovery was much more than what I was ever looking for. Because this is a ministry that helps heal the lives of people with all kinds of hurts and habits and hang-ups. It gives people the John 10:10 experience. Jesus said, the thief comes not to except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. I tried to start a Celebrate Recovery in a previous church that I pastored. But some of the members did not want that kind of people in that church. Over a period of time, I resigned that church, and God led me to start Life Bridge. Linda and I started LifeBridge in our home, in our living room, with just 7 people plus her and I. You see what God can do? Take something terrible and develop into something good. LifeBridge as a church is a bridge that God has used to take multitudes of people from where they are to where they need to be. What a blessing it has been for the last 8 years. God's used me to start a lot of ministries. I started a ministry called Worldwide Missionary Service. We assisted missionaries throughout the world. I started a ministry called Reach America Ministries Incorporated. I was the CEO, president, and founder of that ministry, and we worked with close to 100 church planters all around the world, teaching them how to plant churches. But listen to me carefully. I'm a chaplain for Deer Park Police. I pastor churches, but I've never been involved in a ministry that is as important as Celebrate Recovery. As far as I'm concerned, the most important ministry I've ever been involved in is Celebrate Recovery, because it is making a difference in multitudes of people's lives. And the reason for that is because of the same thing that Jesus did when He was here. Non-condemning, non-judging, not condoning sin, but helping people to get from sin. God has truly blessed Linda and I. We have 2 wonderful children. Chris lives in San Antonio. He's been clean from drugs now for over 8 years. Has a great job, beautiful wife, 2 wonderful children. Renee, our daughter, lives in Louisiana. She's a deputy sheriff, so I have to walk straight down. She has an awesome husband and 2 beautiful daughters. So Linda and I, we have 5 grandchildren, 4 granddaughters, 1 grandson's already in heaven, and that was tough to get through, but God got us through it. It's only by God's grace. I think that any of us can get past our hurts and our habits and our hang-ups. It is by God's grace that we're here tonight, folks. I am a nobody that God took and developed into something that He could use. I still have a problem with understanding how He would use me. A Trump, it was no good for nothing. I couldn't even stay out of jail. But the Scripture says this in 1 Corinthians 15:10, by the grace of God, I am what I am. His grace toward me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all, yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. I praise God for Celebrate Recovery. And I see what it's doing in people's lives. Thank you for letting me share a portion of my story.